Dan, welcome to Ontario,
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
all the way from Alberta.
Yep.
You've come to the seminar here for Invisible Wounds and Dalton Associates for families of first responders. What's the importance of you being here for this?
I think sometimes families are the forgotten heroes behind the first responder community, right? We forget that they are with their first responder partners through missing school events, missing birthdays, missing Christmases, the fear of something happening. I think we underestimate that a lot. I watched my daughters and my wife go through that. This unfortunate, the murder of the two members in Edmonton, now that I'm retired from policing, really hit my wife hard. Harder than it hit her when Dan Woodall died in 2015 when I was still an active member. Because my wife put up safety walls for her own self-regulation to make sure that she was not sitting there on the couch biting her nails waiting to see if I came home or not. And I don't think we think about that enough. And I also think that it's really important for us to talk to our families, and it's okay to not be okay. And sometimes it's okay for our partner to not be okay. And that our partners and our loved ones in our lives don't have to fix it immediately, because sometimes you can't fix it that fast. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, you have to work through it. You have to work through it together as a couple, as a family, because some of those emotional scars are deep, and it takes a lot. And it's also about making sure that we don't keep our partners in a bubble, and that we share with them. And I think that was one of my greatest failings in part of my career, and where I probably hit my lowest, was I'd failed to share with my wife the fears and the things that I was going through. I was trying to protect her, and in doing so, I distanced myself from her and almost destroyed our relationship.
How many years service with the Edmonton Police, I believe you're with?
Yeah, I was with Edmonton Police for 25 years, but I also spent 3 years working in correctional facilities, both provincial and federal. So I was 28 years in the justice system.
You've seen a lot of trauma.
More than I wish I have seen, for sure, yeah.
What is your best advice to a first responder out there? It doesn't matter where you are. You can be military, you can be an ambulance paramedic, or you can be a police officer, firefighter. What is your advice to somebody that hears and sees what the symptoms of post-traumatic stress are, and they think it's happening to themselves?
My first thing is develop a wellness plan. And that can be going to get therapy, going to breathing classes, going to yoga, cold exposure, hot exposure. It's not one thing. And that's my number one advice. Don't think just because you went to therapy, it's a finish line and you're done. Go and develop a wellness plan, because it's not just one thing, and it has to be more of those things for us to work on wellness. And on the second piece of that, anyone coming into this line of work prior to ever seeing any of this trauma, develop a wellness plan. Plan for it. I wish someone would have told me on year 1, year 2, or year 3 that I was going to have the symptoms and issues that I had later in life. Mm-hmm. Because maybe I could have planned for it. Maybe that wellness piece could be something that we institute early on to prevent, as much of the post-traumatic stress disorder as we can.
You touched on it earlier about your wife, about the communication and you not sharing a lot of the things that were going on. And I think that's a fairly common theme in couples. And I think spouses, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a reluctance to even kind of poke the bear on that. What is your advice to a spouse of a first responder that feels that their loved one might be suffering from trauma?
My advice is to talk about it with them if they get the flare up, which is exactly what happened in my house. Mm-hmm. What happened in my house was my wife said I needed to get some help, and I lost my mind, and then I was very mean, and then but she kept fighting for me, and I would say that's the thing: keep fighting for the person, and find whoever's close to them, and give them a call. And say, I'm worried about my spouse. And I think that's really important, because we have those connections and we have those people in our lives that we know that we can lean on. I've had that happen more than once, where a partner of a colleague has called me and reached out because they were worried about their partner. And that seems to have always worked really well in our situation. Make sure that you give them space to not be okay. And once the flare-up's down, try talking again, because oftentimes it just takes that bit of time, whether it's a day or 2 days, just to settle and get regulated. And once the partner sees that their partner is regulated again, ask the question again, and have that conversation again. And I was really careful even in sharing with my spouse not to trauma slime her and tell her all the gory details, but I told her enough that she knew I was struggling. And she would give me the space once I started telling her that, rather than my instant response of anger and wanting to, we know the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I'm a fight guy, and that was one of those things that I had to address and make sure that I was good. And she has always given me the space once I finally started telling her.
Just to further on that, the person that your spouse is reaching out to, what's your advice for that person?
For that person is to make sure that you get whoever you're talking to in a safe space. And I know there's a lot of people are tired of hearing this term, safe space, but get the person in a safe space and make sure that the first thing you do is say, your spouse called me and she reluctantly called me, or he reluctantly called me, because they don't want you to be upset with them, but they're very worried about you and they care about you, and I care about you too, and we want to see you be okay.
Excellent words of advice, Dan. Final question. What's your role here tomorrow? I see on the program your master ceremonies for the Invisible Wounds Dalton Associates First Responder Seminar for Families. So what are you going to be saying to the group?
You know what? Again, I when I first was offered this amazing opportunity, I want to really emphasize that it's okay to not be okay. With the loss of our members in Edmonton, a lot of our members need to hear that right now. And people think that, the funeral's over, everything's better. It's not. Not in first responder world. You're talking 18 months of healing, and people in different stages of grief and different stages of disbelief and different stages of hopefulness. And that message, it's okay to not be okay and you're not alone, are huge.
I really appreciate you sharing with us today, Dan, and thank you for making the trek from Alberta to Ontario to share your insight and wisdom with us. It's greatly appreciated.
Awesome. Thanks so much.